Hello and welcome to Taking Liberties, episode 28 for season 2018. My name is Lee. We've got a full crew tonight. Vikas and Zeev are in the studio tonight with me. We're going to be just kind of turning on the mics and talking. We've got might make this a slightly longer episode. We've got a few topics to cover, so strap yourselves in and let's get cracking. So Vikas, did you want to start with Jacinda Ardern, or do you want to start with libertarian messaging?
I think we should start with Jacinda Ardern because she's such a freaking commie.
So,
she really is.
Being
really.
the good nationalist that she has come in the last week or two. I think it was the week before last that they announced the policy where essentially they're banning foreigners from buying property in New Zealand. This is a policy that we've heard talked about a little bit in the Australian context as well. With the Nationals being keen to stop farms from being bought by them damn forens.
Yes. Non-resident foreigners.
Yes. And ScoMo has talked a bit about actually Joe Hockey even, I remember him talking about the issues around housing prices and foreigners. Now, I think we're probably all on the same page that that's mostly bullshit because housing prices not have very little to do with foreigners and more to do with crappy government policies, but yet it's easy to blame dem forens. I have two foreign-sounding people on this show, so as a white guy, I'm going to let them talk.
Oh, wow. That mighty social justice off you.
I'm giving it my white privilege to give you guys the microphone.
Righto.
Okay.
Which is ironic because Zeev is actually whiter than me. But he's got the foreign-sounding name.
True. True.
You know what? We do have to have a segment on this one day about why white privilege is bullshit.
Yeah, well,
because,
that's
someday.
a conversation you can have because that's not a conversation I can have. I'm just saying.
And that is the bullshit that we need to tackle. But getting aside to Jacinda Ardern, right? Like, so this is weird. So conservatives, communists, and nationalists.
Socialists.
farmers, I guess.
Everybody seems to think that this is, the best idea on the planet.
Solution.
I think, apart from free marketeers and libertarians. And what are we on?
And what I find hilarious about this is consistently they're proven wrong. It's what did Einstein say? Doing the same thing and expecting different results is insanity. And this is the definition of a policy that is insane. So the reason why this doesn't work is because governments don't change their supply policy, right? They control supply, right? Every government everywhere controls the supply of land. I mean, that's the first thing they do. They define their borders and start divvying up the property. So divvying up the land property. So when they do that, if they're not changing the supply of land, all you're doing is mucking around with demand. Sorry, if you're not changing supply and just mucking around with demand, all you can do is change the rate of price increase in relation to the actual price of the land. So it's not actually going to change anything. It's just going to maybe slow down how quickly that price rises.
Well, I think the bigger issue is, I mean that is true. I think the bigger issue is that once you start down this path, there's kind of nowhere to stop it. Once you start saying, well, we're going to start controlling who can buy and sell in order to muck around the prices, they're going to end up at situations where you have rent controls, and it doesn't actually fix the problem. And so the politicians who support these things go back to that same well and say, well, it didn't work with this intervention, but maybe we'll try a deeper intervention. Maybe we'll stop people from buying more rental properties. Maybe we'll stop people from, they just continually ramp up.
I think the point I think another point that needs to be raised is that people actually are going to be worse off as a result of this decision. And that means home buyers, yes, and also people who own homes, homeowners who look to sell them. So home buyers are going to be worse off because investors, foreign investors, are typically chucking in money to ensure that they get a return, and they do that by building and developing land. So yeah, some obviously buy existing property, but they're doing it to make a profit, and you're not going to do that by doing nothing with your land. You're going to invest in it.
That's not entirely true.
Not all of them, of course, but some will. And what that means is that if you prevent foreigners from purchasing land, then you're actually preventing investment in land and investment in property. Obviously, you're also preventing, people from letting out their homes as well, which actually hurts renters. So if they're foreign investors and they own and they let out their homes, well, that's fewer houses in the rental market. That means rents go up. So if you're poorer, if you can't afford to buy, well, suddenly your rent, all else being equal, is going to go up because of this decision. So I'm not quite sure how that helps the worst off in New Zealand society, for example. The people who don't have the savings to buy a home are actually going to be hit by this decision. Another way that people are going to be hit by this decision is that if you're a homeowner and you're looking to sell your home and make a profit off it and live off that profit, or I don't know, use that profit to help you live a more comfortable lifestyle, well, I mean, now the price of your home is going to go down. So if you're a nana looking to get some in-home care by downsizing, well, the amount of care that you can afford to get has suddenly reduced. If you're looking to help your kids get through private school, well, suddenly the amount of fees you can afford to pay, the quality of the school has gone down. Now, a lot of people use the sale of big assets like this to fund their lifestyle, or the lifestyle of their children, or to fund medical expenses. And the fact is, when they retire, particularly when they retire. And what this decision means is that they will actually be poorer and therefore less able to do that. So I'm not convinced that this is actually leaving New Zealanders better off. I think it's leaving them worse off. Otherwise, I mean, they'd be willingly parting with their land for more money if the government weren't stepping in. It doesn't strike me as a good idea to prevent them from doing that.
Yeah, I mean, probably one other element of this is, so one of the problems with any kind of market intervention is you can't make people join in the first place. So, you think about, okay, we're going to tax rich people for having massive incomes. Well, the rich people, okay, you can do that once. You can do it, in that first year, but you can't make them come back. Like if you're a foreigner and if you're essentially a wealthy individual who governments like to target for political purposes, you have options. You don't have to invest in New Zealand. You could invest somewhere else. And so, one of the things these investors are doing are investing in New Zealand. They're paying these higher prices. Well, they don't have to. And if they leave, then the people who would be building for them, or, producing things that they want, they all of a sudden don't have anybody to sell to. So, one of the issues you have with politicians, they just assume, well, if we change this one little thing, okay, we're just going to remove the demand slightly, by getting rid of all those foreigners.
Everything will be better off.
Yeah, they just assume everything else will be the same, and you see this all the time, particularly with like tax policy. Oh, we're gonna increase the tax by this much, but we're gonna all of our assumptions.
That's why they keep saying ceteris paribus, right?
Yeah, exactly. But it's not
equal. Nothing else is equal. Everyone responds to these changes by changing their behaviour.
So that
creates disadvantages too.
Yeah, well, and it's 100% true to say that foreigners are adding to the demand that in the housing market, but that's just that's a symptom, not the cause. That will happen, and there will be investors who want to speculate and make money off these things. But that's you can't fix that by just changing the demand. You need to fix the supply. That's ultimately what's the issue. And if you get rid of the demand, and then well, the supply will go down as well, because they're looking for those Chinese students whose dads are high-ranking Communist Party, blah blah blah, whatever. They're looking for that windfall, and they don't need to invest. They don't need to You know, if the return's not there for them, they're not going to bother. Especially, I mean, particularly, and I'm going on a little bit, but particularly when you consider the difficulty there is in the system. So, I mean, one of the truly nightmare scenarios you can imagine when it comes to housing is if you look at San Francisco. So, there's a few people I follow on Facebook who are sort of involved in issues around housing in San Francisco. And if you look at the examples of people who buy a block and want to redevelop it, including redevelop it with low-income housing in particular, the hurdles they face are just unbelievable. Like, people are spending years trying to develop these properties. And it's not like they're trying to build, like a space station. They're just building regular housing, but because of the complexity of the system.
All of that, I mean, all of that holds true in Australia as well. I don't know about New Zealand, but it can certainly take years to develop land here just because you're waiting on approvals.
And then
from
anything else, I mean, they've got legal procedures where people can object and take you to court and all this kind of stuff.
That's
there's certainly there's some of that I know with in WA with the different sort of development agencies and like local councils and then administrative tribunals, and people can make your life difficult. And you're not going to go through that unless you can get a return. Like, you're not going to go through that unless you're going to get a big return because you're not going to do it very often. You're not going to be able to get these proposals through. And so, well, why bother with all that crap if you can't sell it to the people who want to pay the most, which is, Uncle Shen's best nephew who's coming to do his medicine degree at, Auckland University or whatever.
So
I think, go on, because
one of the typical complaints that comes up about this is if they don't enact this, right, what you're going to get is high-rise, soulless high-rise city, highly dense places like Tokyo, like what you see in Asia, right?
Yeah.
But those places exist because of laws like this, right? And it's just like you said, like you're going to build these places that are expensive and for like very rich clientele. But you're going to try, because of the process to actually get it approved, it's going to have to be a big sort of thing, right? It's going to have to be high density. So ultimately,
to an extent.
Yeah, to an extent. I mean, you're going to get medium density as well, but usually medium and high density. And quite frankly, I think medium density is bullshit anyway. But the point is, you're going to get these kind of constructions that are basically built around high density housing, and these laws basically create the problems they're trying to fix.
Look, I mean, I don't know about that. I mean, they certainly leave developers with no room to build high density development other than in the CBD. I mean, it would literally be illegal for them to build it anywhere else. But and I mean, certainly with medium density, the same holds true wherever it's allowed. Again, it would be illegal to build it, in the suburbs, so it has to be built where it's allowed to be.
Until the government says it's fine, and then...
And then they rezone.
They do eventually anyway.
They do eventually anyway, yes. And I think an important point that needs to be said is, look, demand is a good thing, and people being in the same place is a good thing, and even density can be a good thing too. Okay, people. The point of housing is to, make sure that people have a place to live. It is not to make sure that every single person has, a white picket fence and a 4-bedroom or 3-bedroom or whatever with a nice backyard. It is to give people a place to live. And if we create an environment where it is more difficult for people to build housing, then yes, the cost of housing is going to go up. And it's going to go up based on the New Zealand's current population. It's not going to go up because foreign investors are chucking money into the market. Well, not by much anyway, but because they're only a part of the market. What really determines the cost of housing in New Zealand, be it via rent or property or outright purchase, is the population. If you have 1 million people living in a small confined area, then the cost of the housing there will go up. If, on the other hand, there's only 500,000 in the same area, then again, the cost of housing has just more or less halved in that same confined space. Other things being equal, which they never are, but and that's what people are missing. So tagging foreign investors and saying no more of them. I mean, it's a tokenistic move. It won't do anything. Won't do much, if anything, noticeable to the cost of housing. I mean, a lot of the same kind of moves have been done here in Victoria already. Foreign investors have been hit with a slew of new stamp duty taxes. Property prices haven't really moved that much. They've stabilised, and they've stabilised at sky-high levels. And that doesn't suggest to me that tagging foreign investors is a solution to a housing affordability problem. I mean, it's still the case that you need to pay about 9 to 10 times of your salary to purchase a home here. I really don't think that this ban, quote unquote, will do much to help people buy a home in New Zealand. I'm really skeptical about that because it's not actually affecting the population of numbers in New Zealand. It doesn't actually mean that there's fewer people for more houses at the end of the day.
Somebody dropped out. Vikas, oh, there you're back. I think also one aspect which is important to talk about, particularly when it gets to inner city areas, which you've already brought up, sort of high rise and whatnot, is the NIMBY factor, which I think, as I mentioned with San Francisco, that's one of the big issues. It's not so much government. It's government in the sense that it's state institutions, but it's been driven by popular desires to have some sort of control. We have this really bad dynamic where you've got essentially the people who local residents have an incentive to oppose this stuff because it affects their property values, it affects their amenity. Like if you're in the there's certain parts of Perth in particular where if it wasn't for restrictions driven by NIMBYism, you'd probably have a lot of high-rise development. But because you've got all these old areas filled with old people who like living in quaint, suburbs with, $1 million property values, they don't want to have more dense accommodation put in there. They like single family homes, and they'll come in with their heritage listing and they'll come in with their protests and, they hold all the cards. And really, because we don't have a very strong system, really, here or in New Zealand, where property owners can just be like, no, we're just going to do what we want. It all has to go through councils. It has to go through state, well, in our case, state government sort of agencies. I imagine it's sort of more just local councils and the federal government or the New Zealand government in New Zealand. So it's not just politicians who are seeking political favor, or seeking this sort of their own central planning. It's just regular people who are driving prices higher because they don't want to see the kind of change that would really bring down prices. I think that's probably another big aspect, particularly when it comes to the density of cities. Which really, like if particularly lefties were serious, they would understand that density is what you need to get all the other stuff that you want, which is, public transport and all this kind of stuff. Like, the reason there's a reason why Japan and New York have like the two of the only subway systems in the world that actually turn a profit. It's because there's millions of people living in cities the size of a post stamp, and that's the only way you can make these big, grand, transportation plans viable. Here in WA, it's ridiculous. Like they're talking, like they're spending billions of dollars to build sort of a 2-kilometer stretch of railway, and it'd never make its money back. It just never in a million years. But
the justification for that is always that it's to provide a public option to people. To which I generally say, honestly, it would literally be cheaper for the Commonwealth to subsidize Uber trips. I kind of sit there and look at these programs and go, there's really no cost benefit analysis ever done to this.
No.
And the funny thing is, it's because politicians can ignore engineers and do ignore engineers.
Yeah.
Because they do consult. I mean, every engineer in this country does a first-year civil engineering course. And the takeaway lesson for that, as every engineer will find out, because we all sit there and just go like, oh, wow, this thing, no wonder why so many engineers end up being libertarians, because it's all literally from start to finish examples of government fuck up. And how politicians are wrong about everything.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that totally reminds me of the episode of Utopia, which I think we've mentioned a million times before, about high-speed rail. You know, there's that great scene where it's like, you know, the politician's lackey is like, oh, surely there's going to be something. And he's like, there's not a single report that's ever been done that said this is viable. And yet the politician's lackey is still trying to egg him on to find some way to make it justifiable to have these, you know, this high-speed rail from Melbourne to Brisbane, and, you know, going via Sydney and Canberra. It's because it's got nothing to do with reality. It's got everything to do with just political incentives.
Exactly. And if you want the best example of that, take the Snowy Mountain River scheme. Right?
Which that episode brings up. That episode of Utopia brings up.
Yeah, that episode does bring up. Yeah. So I was actually deeply appreciative of this, because it sounded like it meant that they had consulted an engineer or someone who did, you know, an engineering course in this country, because the Snowy Mountain River scheme was sold to people as something to give jobs to immigrants to do, right? It wasn't sold on its technical ability, because it's actually technically very unsound. It wasn't sold on its ability to provide water, because it doesn't actually provide that much water. It does. I think the propaganda that most people learn is it diverted water to the other side of those mountains. Now, here's the thing: it didn't really do that, right? At least not in numbers that are consequential. It diverted some rivers to areas, but they were, you know, pretty much in the area. The point is, billions of dollars were spent giving jobs to recent migrants that were coming from post-war Europe. That's what that was all about. From an engineering sense, that program was an absolute dud. It was one of the biggest white elephants we've ever spent any money on. It's pretty much used as an example by engineers. It doesn't matter how much documentation you can provide to the government that it's useless, they will find a way to make it happen. Yeah,
absolutely. Because that's how politicians operate. That's, you know, they like big shiny things. They like, you know, they like to cut the ribbon. They like to be able to show off the, you know, the 3D design of what it will look like. You know, it's all just, it's perfect for politicians.
It's all about the photo op.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, but I don't. But see, to paraphrase Yahtzee here, you know, from Zero Punctuation, this is a two cunt system. It takes a cunt to bring it up, and it takes another cunt to accept it. I place equal blame on the voter on this one.
Sure. Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, that's it. They're the ones who turn around and vote for these idiots. You know.
Yeah.
That's the thing. Most people don't necessarily make informed, considered decisions about infrastructure spending. I mean, the only way you can really do that in any limited sense is to say, well, if I were a shareholder in a hypothetical company investing in this, would I support the directors? And then when you confront that kind of decision-making analysis, you just realize, well, I actually don't have enough information from this little news article to make that call.
Yep.
And I actually won't ever be able to have enough information. I don't have the time. And once you realize that politicians are just playing on that fundamentally, that nobody has the time, nobody has the means, and nobody's going to take it seriously. Oh, they'll say, oh, it'll save me a few minutes here and there, this latest project. That sounds like a good idea. But nobody's going to really care if you hire 10 traffic controllers or one. Nobody's really going to care. Go on, because
and that's why media, right? Our media, the fifth estate, shouldn't be the way it is right now. And the ABC's one of the biggest offenders of this.
Yeah.
They simply do not hire experts. They hire media personnel. Sorry, they hire effectively the same kind of toss that everybody else is trying to hire, right, to do their media stuff. So at the end of the day, they get they don't differentiate their product from what's available in the commercial space. Now,
there's no applied skepticism fundamentally in our journalism sector about any of these projects.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the big problem.
I don't know.
There is a bit.
Yeah, I'd say
it's
there
a
is.
minority voice.
I think, part of it is, in the case of some of this stuff, it's going to be just the difficulty of actually getting the information, because you think about, like, if there is even a business case for it, any infrastructure program, like just, take any infrastructure that's built, politicians are not going to reveal it because the business case, even if there is one, which I'm assuming a lot of them don't even have it, it's not going to be in favour. Like, you think about I'm just thinking about all the big projects that the last Premier of WA did. He, did this, marina thing, and he built a friggin' $1 billion stadium, and he's done this and that. I never saw the business case for any of them, and all of them were hidden under commercial in confidence. So, like, even getting the information, because they're working with private contractors, they can use that as an excuse to keep it confidential.
Sure, but then
even if which isn't to let the media off the hook. But, like, just to say
that doesn't let the media off the, I was going to
just to say it's not, like, I think there is skepticism there, because of course every paper wants to be the paper that breaks this, the thing that they're wasting billions of dollars because that's juicy. But I think it's harder, and I think if you don't have, like, a libertarian like skepticism where you just think that everything is bullshit, even maybe when it's not, like, that's not necessarily going to drive you to hunt it down relentlessly. Like, but if we three were employed by a newspaper and we saw, like, any government project, would just be mercilessly tracking down, because that's just how we are. Like, we don't trust these guys.
But I wouldn't even need a project. So just to use an example, right? Let's take Gonski. The media just copied exactly what the parties were saying about Gonski.
Yeah.
Right? Well, if you take a look at Gonski, right, the actual fundamentals of Gonski are basically the same as a policy out of the United States. It's almost a carbon copy of
Is it No Child Left Behind?
Yeah, No Child Left Behind.
Yeah.
Right? And every person who's actually read it will bring up that same allegory, and they go, well, No Child Left Behind wasn't an entirely bad policy. And then I point to a great documentary in the United States called Waiting for Superman, which did explain exactly how it was a bad policy. So, from my perspective, I sit there and go, like, we really don't take the lessons of these things from other places. We're more than happy to copy these policies. We're not happy to actually take the lessons from them.
Except that, on something like that, you'd have Jennifer Buckingham from the Centre for Independent Studies in The Australian saying, this is a bad reason for X, Y, and Z reason. So, like, the pundits they hire to, maybe not their in-house kind of regular op-ed writers, but, certainly when, they turn to experts, they will turn to educational experts. They will get, Kevin Donnelly, or they'll get, well, I'm thinking of The Australian because that's the only one I've read. I'm sure the Sydney Morning Herald has their own, experts they turn, academics they turn to. There's the conversation. Like, that's despite the fact that it's taxpayer funded to a large extent, or to a total extent. They do get people who understand policy because that's their area of expertise. So that I think that stuff is out there. It's just very hard to reach the people who ultimately would make the decision. The voters, because voters rightfully, as is logical, don't have the inclination to look at this stuff because it's too hard to figure it out. It's too big, it's too complex. They just hear more funding.
But they feel compelled to have an opinion, understandably, and they'll have one based on passing thoughts.
Yeah.
That sounds good. That doesn't sound good. That will be the extent of it.
Yeah, and I suppose that kind of comes to our second topic, which was like about libertarian messaging, right?
Yeah.
So if we want to go back to the first example, if you want to talk about how housing ownership affects you as a person, right? Effectively, it's the government stepping in and saying, no, you can't sell it to that person, right? Even though they've offered you the most money for that property, right? You're going to have to sell it to person B because they happen to be a local. So now you have to go through the trouble of, hey, I'm taking less money now for my property as a result of having to comply with this government regulation. Or in the case of, like, to put it in case of the farmers that we constantly want to protect,
by we mean not those in this conversation, but everybody else.
Yeah, yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
But if you want to talk about the context of the farmers, the context the farmers can't necessarily grow their business because they've got to get approval. Because they've now got to get approval to sell it to someone. No, the farmers can't sell it to who they want, right? Which then brings up the prices, which makes it harder for them to actually grow their business because they don't have that extra price in the equity to dip into.
Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is something I was taking to heart a little earlier as well in trying to outline how each individual that was, whether it be a renter or a homeowner or a home buyer in New Zealand, there's no convincing case that anyone in those positions is going to be left better off as a result of a ban on foreigners buying property. And
in the short term,
some home buyers maybe in the short term might see, but homeowners will be left worse off and renters will be left worse off. What I will say though is that kind of ties into your point about messaging, because what you're really getting at, I think, is that it's important to tell people stories about how an individual person, ideally a real person, but at least just say put yourself into the position of XYZ person in this scenario, and to tell them here is how that person will be affected or was affected, even better to provide a real example, and then people can empathize with that a lot more than they can with a data point. People appreciate data points, but in a way it's almost like data people will fall asleep to without an empathetic story, and people will dismiss an empathetic story about a specific individual if there's no data, because they'll be like, oh, well, that's just one example.
Yep.
So you really need both to sell your case. And I think
definitely
what Vikas you're getting at is that libertarians focus too much on the data, whichever slant there are, but not enough on the person.
See, I actually disagree with that. So, I think most libertarians understand the importance of personalizing it. I mean, I think to a large extent, political persuasion is just really hard. And there's not many libertarians to begin with. So, we're drawing from a small pool of highly ideological people. Most people are not ideological in the sense that they have a desire to be consistent in all their ideas, and they have sort of some well understood base sort of bedrock principles that they then sort of, from that basis, they then build the rest of the foundation on top of it. People just kind of like the things they like and dislike the things they dislike.
But most people get to any given set of ideas just by accepting ideas incrementally.
Sure.
So let's not discount that.
It's just to say that libertarians are not the normal kind of people. And of course, I should say, to be fair, everybody, there's all this, there's good evidence to say that everybody just has their preconceived notions, and then they sort of logic their way back from what they like to the kind of create. So, but putting that aside, if anybody could figure out how to truly properly message anything, so you get a guaranteed response, you could put that in a bottle and sell it for a lot of money, because no one really kind of knows how to do it properly. And I think libertarians do try to personalize it. I mean, I think about the ATA, they use stats, but with this vaping stuff, I think they've done a pretty good job of, going out there and messaging it. Now, whether it actually gets any traction, that's a separate question. And
well, actually, the vaping one has been quite successful. So if you take a look at it, the West Australian Party, which one? The West Australian Labor Party.
Liberal Party.
No, I heard it was Labor.
No, was this last week or the week before?
Yeah, it was last week.
It was the
Liberals.
It was the Liberals. It was a state Liberal conference.
Oh, good.
It's late at night.
For the benefit of anybody who doesn't understand WA politics, they're the ones who aren't in government currently.
The
opposition. They're in opposition, which of course always makes these things easier to have these grand statements of principle when you're in opposition.
Yeah.
But I'm not saying it's unsuccessful. Just to say whether we actually eventually get change, that's still an open question, and I think if there is change, the way they've gone about the issue, I think you can credibly say it's like they've approached it in a really great kind of way. Like they've really tried to personalize it, and they've really, and aggressively pursued it.
Yes. And the great thing about that policy is that it's a niche policy that so few people are aware of.
Yes.
And which means that there's so few people opposed to it.
Yeah.
And a nice open market to persuade people.
It's also something where people are able to engage in it without the government's permission. So, my theory is the reason Uber worked so effectively in terms of changing, overcoming the taxi cartels is like anybody could download the app and start using it even without government permission. And so, this approach to go after, to support, even if you tried to prop up the taxi cartels, you still couldn't stop people from doing what they're doing. Still people were getting a taste of what it's like to have this real freedom. And I think we see that with vaping. I live in WA. It's totally illegal. Like all aspects of vaping are illegal. And yet when I'm out and about in the city, I see people vaping because...
Well, I'm not saying... I don't think it's totally illegal, but it's legal to use with nicotine.
No, it's illegal to purchase. Like the WA Supreme Court actually effectively banned it all. So I think you can't buy it.
Okay,
you can't. I don't think you can even import it into WA.
Maybe. I don't know, but
I'm just saying specifically.
Vikas, what's your take on this sort of thing, anyway?
Well, yeah. So I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there in the sense that because it was easy to get into, it built a lot of popular support. But if you want to get into that particular why that campaign was so good, it's because they had the statistics and they had that personal story.
Yeah.
So you remember how Lee was saying earlier, you can have situations where you've got stories, wonderful stories, but no data, so nobody's going to take you seriously. And libertarians tend to be on the other side of the spectrum where we have so much data. I mean, there are so many examples of pure government failure, and we just don't have the stories to go behind it. And areas where we do have that advantage is things like drug legalization, for harm reduction, right? That case is super easy to make. Vaping, another one, is super easy to make. Now,
infrastructure, not so much.
Infrastructure, not so much.
Because because it's hard to, find a human angle to a story about a white elephant, if that makes sense.
Sure,
but I can't
also
point to the victims of the people who, were indirectly harmed by them spending $1 billion to build a new sports field. I can't say this person was victimized because they built it on a swamp. There was nobody who was kicked out of their homes. And it's all just indirectly, through the taxpayers being
there are the
screwed
traffic
over the
management people.
But
I don't know if you've seen them. Go on.
Yeah, but I was going to say traffic management. So traffic is a good example where I can point to statistics and show data where people are personally harmed by it, right? But here's the thing: what is the harm of bad traffic management, right? Traffic, right? Now you're going to be late to work, right? And people just sit there and go but if the private companies did it, you'd have you'd have tolls everywhere. And I sit there going I don't think you understand. Right now, it's private companies building the roads and it's government managing the traffic. That's what's getting you to this traffic situation. If you had a situation where people were incentivized to effectively, manage traffic,
then people would spend a lot less time on the road and a lot more time making money. Heaven forbid.
And so people, so with infrastructure, the thing is, the nuisance is, the damage is obvious sometimes, and you can show it to them. The statistics are there to back that, but people just regard the damage as nuisancery, and they consider it the thing is, the government is very good at making its nuisances look like a little thing that you shouldn't complain about because all the other stuff it does is great. And everybody has one area of government that they will defend to the core as a core tenet of that government. For most people in Australia, it's healthcare, which is hilarious because the government doesn't actually do anything about healthcare. The government just pays for it, right?
Apart from public hospitals,
centrally planning it as well and regulating it.
No, public hospitals public hospitals are state managed and run, right? So people will fight tooth and nail saying the federal government should run it, right? Except the reality is the federal government is just a credit card. And quite honestly, I don't see why MasterCard, Visa, or even American Express couldn't tender and do that for us.
Right.
Quite frankly, it's just a payment, right? It's just a payment
Yeah.
system.
Sure.
Gotcha.
So when someone says like, "Oh, they're going to privatize Medicare," I'm just like, maybe we can get frequent flyer points or something out of it.
Yeah, I mean,
That should be the libertarian slogan.
that's a fair point. Medicare is really just a payment system from two private providers. So I don't really see what the issue is with making that system privatized.
Yeah, I mean,
all the payments could remain the same.
Just to go back to the
Anyway.
traffic thing, though, like one of the issues with that is that people don't price their time properly. So
No.
like tolls from an economic logic sense, like from sort of economic logic, it makes total sense to have tolls because then you're essentially. I mean, leaving aside how you actually would manage it, but essentially people can pay more to value their time more highly. And this is something like from in my own life I learned as I came to understand economics better, is I always hated paying for parking. And it's because like I understood, I could see my, the money leave my bank account, but noticing my time being wasted is a lot harder. And I think that's the same dynamic at play in tolls, where people see the money, they see the ticking over, or they hear the beeping on their dash, and they know they're being charged, and yet they don't understand. Like if they're just sitting there in traffic, they're not like counting the time. They're not saying, "Oh, well, this is the hour I spent. This is the minimum. This is how much I get paid an hour. Therefore, this hour cost me X, or this 45 minutes cost me X." And so that's one of the things, the problems you have with public policy.
They don't see the extra shift that they could get.
Yeah. So, and if you sort of economically like counted up all the amount of time, all the dollar hours of people's time being wasted, you're talking about actually like real money. Like it's not insignificant. Yeah, the amount of time people are spending in traffic unnecessarily. But that's hard to point to. You say, well, you're being victimized, except you don't feel like you're being victimized. You're just getting frustrated.
I was just going to say, the government already does that. So the justification for smoking taxes as high as they are is that they price people's times exactly the way you said it. So the way they arrive at their $31 billion is largely through lost man hours.
Yeah.
So,
you mean the harms from smoking?
Yeah. It's through lost man hours. And the other one is people dying prematurely.
Yeah.
There's an assumption that they'll make this much extra in taxes.
Yeah.
And that's how they arrive at that $31 billion figure.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you could do that, and you could basically... I've been a huge proponent of this before, saying like, hey, let's just use their same algorithm and turn it on traffic and just go, hey, is the government a really good manager of traffic? And like it would come to hundreds of billions of dollars.
Yeah.
No doubt. But on that note, gentlemen, I might take my leave. You're welcome to continue, but it is bedtime for Zev. All right.
I think it's actually... I think it's gone to 43 minutes, so I think we're at the end.
Okay, all right, we'll leave it at that then. All right,
okay.
So Zeev, farewell. You can go right now. I'll do a quick outro.
Farewell.
Thanks everybody for joining us. If you liked this kind of a longer format, please let us know. We might just occasionally just turn on the mics and go for a slightly longer conversation. So you can connect to us through Facebook. Taking Liberties Radio is our page, and I'm on Twitter at Aussie Liberty if you want to tweet at me. And yeah, we're always posting in the Australian Libertarian Forum and Society page, groups. So yeah, connect us via that way. And thanks for joining us.
See ya.
Indeed. Bye now.